Hey everybody, my name is Lynn Hayes. Welcome back to my channel and to another episode of the astrological influences that are affecting us for the week of July 20th, 2020. So today we'll be talking about the new moon in Cancer, the second new moon in that sign, which is fairly unusual. Then we'll be covering some of the other influences that will be affecting us throughout the week. And towards the end of the video, we'll be talking about where the moon is going and how we can use those energies and how that will affect us. So stick around and let's get started. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the new moon in Cancer. We had the first new moon in Cancer was at the summer solstice. The sun and the moon were both at 0 degrees, the very first degree of that sign. So having a new moon, which represents a new beginning at the solstice point, which is one of those balance points in the year. We have the equinoxes where the light and dark are in balance. The new moon is the beginning of a new lunar cycle. Under the new moon, we have a sense of a new beginning. There's a fresh new start, and the sign that the moon is in describes the nature of those energies. It describes the nature and the quality of what we can bring into being at this new moon. So when we have Cancer, Cancer is all about the family and the home, but more than that, it's about our inner self. It's about our inner life and the very heart of who we are. We already had the new moon in Cancer back in June. This new moon requires that we balance that Cancerian energy of our inner world with the outer world, because the moon at this time is exactly opposite the planet Saturn. Saturn is the planet of structure and foundation. It's the planet that requires that we base ourselves in the material world. I like to say that Saturn requires that we master the material world. There's a lot of hard work and discipline that needs to be done with Saturn. Saturn's in its own sign of Capricorn now. It's just finishing its passage there, but it's in Capricorn for this new moon, and the moon and the sun are both exactly opposite Saturn in Capricorn. Now, the sun and moon are also opposite Jupiter and Pluto, which are all in Capricorn, but it's Saturn that's the closest, the strongest aspect. So here we have these planets in Capricorn, including Saturn, which is said to rule Capricorn. Capricorn is very based in the material world, very concerned with the need to put aside our emotions and just do the hard work and focus on the things that have to be done. And yet here's the new moon in Cancer with the tender, open heart, the vulnerability that we find, the need to connect with others and find our tribe. So this is the duality here, and with any astrological duality, we always have to find integration. Oppositions, opposites, there's a tension between them, but what's required is to find balance, to find a way to meld the two together, to find a way to integrate these two opposites into our life. So the questions we need to be asking at this time under this new moon are things like, how can we continue to feel deeply, to open our hearts at a time when there's so much difficulty and there's so much work that has to be done? This is something that we're all struggling at this time. We have so many feelings and emotions and fears and anxieties about what's going on in the world, and yet we have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that's what this new moon is really teaching. There are some other dynamics too that will help. The Asteroid Palace, which has to do with creative intelligence, divine intelligence. It's the kind of wisdom that just descends on us from the gods. Palace, I feel, it's like a beacon of light. It's always guiding us towards the wise choice. So Pallas is lined up with these other Capricorn planets. So having Pallas with these Capricorn planets helps to give us that grain of wisdom. Pallas can help to elevate our vision so that we have a broader view, like an eagle which flies above and can see everything on the ground. That's what Pallas helps with. One thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is the new planet Eris. Eris, the goddess of discord, who threw the golden apple into the wedding party when she wasn't invited. Her feelings were hurt, and she created the beginning of the Trojan War, which went on for many years and made permanent changes to Western civilization. So a little accident, a little funky thing happening can have a huge effect. And right now, all those Capricorn planets, especially Pluto, are in this challenging aspect to Eris. So the energy is sort of chaotic. We don't really know what's going to come of it. The important thing to understand is that we cannot control it. Much of this is outside of our control. And this is a really good time because we can't do anything else. We're in quarantine, we're locked in our houses. The only thing that we can do is work on ourselves and work on our relationships and try to create a more functional environment for ourselves so that when this is over, which it certainly will be over at some point, we can move through our lives from a better place. And I feel that that's what this Cancer New Moon is all about. It's about settling into a place in the heart where we can be strong, we can feel supported, we can feel loved and vulnerable, but still be able to do our work in the world, the Capricornian thing. This new moon also features a visit from the comet Neowise. This is a new comet. Apparently it hasn't been visible from Earth for 6,800 years. So it could be a pretty big deal. For thousands of years, people thought that comets were harbingers of doom. And more recently, people are thinking maybe they are messengers from other realms. Maybe keep an ear out and see if you might get some of those messages, and be sure to let me know. So that's the new moon this week. There's a lot going on there. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is the harmonious alignment between Jupiter and Neptune. Jupiter is the planet of optimism and confidence, and it helps us to define what gives our life meaning. Meaning is really the key to understanding Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is harmonizing in a sextile to the planet Neptune. Neptune, the outer planet, the transformational force that inspires us. Neptune urges us to have experiences of magic, experiences that are creative, experiences that are spiritual. So Neptune inspires us to have a direct experience of the divinity, whether you call that God, goddess, nature. Jupiter and Neptune are connected in some ways because Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces. Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces. Neptune is actually in its sign of Pisces right now, so it's particularly strong. So Jupiter and Neptune, they share some of this idealism. They share this desire to create magic and to create positive things in the world. So this is kind of a happy place, really, for Jupiter and Neptune both to be. They like each other, they're natural allies. So can that help us? You know, ideally, it can help us. The first phase of this sextile was in March, which is when the virus started to take over. It seems possible to me that the sextile from Jupiter to Neptune in Pisces, which does have to do with viruses and illness, you know, Jupiter may have helped Neptune a little more than it helped us. But in any case, there is this sort of softening of the heart energies. There's a sense of awakening to greater magic, to a greater connection with something that's divine, with inspiration. When we're talking about this harmonious sextile, though, we have to remember that Jupiter is also being compressed by the influence of Saturn and Pluto. So Jupiter is not quite as happy and buoyant as it normally is. It's got Pluto on one side, Saturn on the other. They're just smushing it in this vise. We can just imagine Pluto and Saturn saying to Jupiter, we know you want to be happy, we know you want to be optimistic, but you have to look at the facts. That's what Saturn is saying. Saturn says, look at the facts, do what you have to do. And Pluto's saying, just get out of the way. I'm clearing the decks. I'm getting rid of whatever isn't working, and we're going to start from scratch. But in the midst of this Jupiter harmonizing with Neptune, there's some creative balance that we can find in our life. We could, though, as a result of Jupiter and Neptune, feel a little bit maybe foggy, a little bit of a lack of clarity. It could be a little more difficult to focus. The energies are more supportive of creativity, imagination. These are things that are really favored right now. So right now is a really good time to use those creative juices to find some space in your life to be able to enhance imagination, but also because of Saturn being there and because of Jupiter being in Capricorn, to be disciplined about it, to create some structure. Every day I write, every day I paint. These are things that Jupiter in Capricorn will really find useful. So now let's talk about the other planetary energies that are coming up this week. There's a lot of Mercury happening, especially in the early part of the week. So Mercury is a planet of the mind. It has to do with communication. It has to do with the way we think and process information. Under the influence of Mercury, we are hungry to learn. We're very curious about things. So at the beginning of the week, between the 20th and the 22nd or so, that's like Monday through Wednesday, Mercury is going to be in a challenging aspect to Chiron. Chiron is a planet of wounding and healing. And Chiron has to do with emotional wounds. And when there's a trigger to Chiron, often we feel triggered. We have an emotional eruption of some kind. Maybe our feelings are hurt. Maybe we feel abandoned, neglected, those sorts of difficult feelings. With the square from Mercury to Chiron, it could bring up some of those wounds, but Mercury also gives us the tools to be able to think about them, to be able to learn about what do these emotions have to teach me? What are they saying to me? What can I learn from these feelings that I'm having? Mercury can give us a little bit of detachment, which is helpful when we're doing emotional healing so we don't get locked into a story. Then from the 21st to the 23rd or so you can see that these overlap, Mercury is in a harmonious alignment with Uranus. I like to think of Uranus as the higher octave of Mercury. Mercury represents the mind. Uranus represents insight, intuition that comes from nowhere. When Mercury is harmonizing with Uranus, we're stimulated to see things differently. We're awakened to new possibilities. So while we're having this emotional, perhaps a little discomfort, Uranus is helping us to understand these sorts of things at a deeper level. Then from the 23rd to the 25th or so, Mercury is in a challenging aspect to Ceres, the goddess of nutrition and nurturing. Ceres is associated with food and nutrition, but I think of it also as having to do with how we feel about living on planet Earth, how we feel about being in a body. How well do we take care of ourselves? How well do we feed ourselves good food? All of those healthy activities that we do because we understand that our body is the temple of God. So when Mercury is in a challenging aspect to Ceres, we may be struggling with that a little bit. You may find yourself overeating to try to compensate for thoughts that are disturbing you. So just know that that's coming, and right now, with the virus situation and everything else, I feel that it's important to really pay attention to our personal ecology, the food that we're taking in, the habits that we're following. And this is a week where Mercury, regulating the mind, can really help us to make a plan, can help us to think about these things so that they're more productive. Then on the 22nd, the sun will move into Leo. Leo is ruled by the sun and has to do with a celebration of life. Under the influence of Leo, we feel expansive, we feel joyful. So this is going to be a good shift. It's going to be a happy shift for most of us. The last thing is towards the end of the week, there's a challenging aspect from Venus to Neptune. And we also have the Jupiter-Neptune situation that I talked about earlier. When Venus is in a challenging aspect to Neptune, our relationships, which are ruled by Venus, may be confusing. What does that person mean? I can't seem to get through to them. I thought he said this. Why didn't she show up when she said? You know, there can be some deception potentially. It's only for a couple of days, so this is not a huge deal. But it's something to just be aware of and watch for. On the positive side, any Venus-Neptune connection is wonderful for creativity. So now let's talk a little bit about where the moon is, just quickly. So we have the new moon in Cancer, which is on the 20th. That is at 1:33 p.m. Eastern time. Please adjust for your own locality. Then the moon is going to move into Leo at 4:16 p.m. also on the 20th. The moon will be in Leo for a couple of days, and while the moon is in Leo, we will likely feel more buoyant. As the moon goes through the signs, it puts us through different moods. When the moon is in Virgo, which it will be on the 22nd, you may feel more like cleaning. When the moon is in Leo, you may feel more like celebrating. So if you're thinking about having a Zoom party, this period between the afternoon of the 20th and the evening of the 22nd Eastern Time, US, would be a really good time. That's when the moon is in Leo. Then the moon is going to move into Virgo on the 22nd at 7:40 p.m. Like I said, that's a good time for cleaning. It's also a very good time for organizing, and for anything that requires planning and organization is very well suited for the Virgo moon. Then on the 24th, late in the evening, just before 10 o'clock Eastern, the moon will move into Libra. The moon will be in Libra until very early on the 27th Eastern Time. When the moon is in Libra, we really need to feel peaceful. We are much more concerned about our relationship. The idea of how people are getting along is more important. We may find ourselves feeling indecisive. All of the options may seem perfectly fine. But the most important thing is any disruption to our equanimity, we will be much more sensitive to. Under the influence of Libra, anything artistic is going to be favored. So painting, creating art, and that takes us to the 27th when we'll have another video. I think that's a good place to end. Thank you so much for joining me, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment box below, and I'll see you next week.